point of focus here is the couple of things in terms of my thinking. We're going to have a large earthquake, Pacific Northwest. It'll be isolating. It's going to isolate us. It may isolate us from medical treatment. So I want to be able to handle the vast majority of medical issues here can be handled in a relatively inexpensive fashion by preparing ahead of time for the vast majority of injuries. Just using it on Courtney Brown's terms, a probabilistic viewpoint, just taking that viewpoint. It is most probable I'll have to deal with lacerations as a result of earthquakes, a lot of broken glass. It's most probable in an earthquake that we'll have fires, but it's less probable there than the lacerations. Now, in an earthquake, unlike on a boat, you are going to have a high probability of gravity impact damage. Things falling on people and animals that you'll have to deal with the broken bones and bruises and punctures and so on as a result of this. And so it makes you alter your fundamental approach. But from a time perspective, from a small boater's perspective, one of the first key things you have to decide is, in treating this injury, beyond the instant of the triage, of noting what the injury is and how you're going to have to go about it, one of the things you have to put into your mind is, okay, how long is it going to be? And what kind of trouble do I have to go through to get this person back to some level of sophisticated medical care? Now, in an earthquake, we also have the further disadvantage of saying to ourselves, will it be possible to achieve that, getting back to sophisticated medical care, and will the sophisticated medical care be able to function? Because we don't know those are true. And so they put an element of uncertainty in this, and that must really impact your thinking as well. You have to take the worst case scenario thinking and assume that you're going to be on your own and have to deal with this at some level of greater sophistication than you would like to undertake, but you need to be prepared for. And so when you prepare for this thing, you in my mind would go to the extreme level of the small boat sailor's blue water view. And that is that I'm out in the middle of the damn Atlantic Ocean, something's happened, I've got to deal with it, and it's going to be at least a number of days before I have even contact with other individuals that I could talk to about this, or perhaps weeks before we get to a situation where we're able to get this person to sophisticated medical care. And of course, in a small boat situation, if you've got a small crew and one of them becomes injured, then the whole boat's safety becomes degraded and put at risk, as well as your schedule, etc. So all of that intrudes on your thinking. All that being said, this brings me up to a certain point. I've recently decided to go through and redo all of my medical kits. Now, I do this about every 10 years or so, because not only of the degradation of the materials, but also advances in the medical materials themselves. And I went ahead and purchased new expedition kits from an outfit. I'll name them here. I wish I could type all of this, but it save us a lot of time, because you're going to have to do some looking up if you really want to go and follow my plan, but you don't have to. The idea is the sound point. The focus point of this. The idea is make yourself an expedition medical chest that you will be able to use. It can be done relatively cheaply. You can actually buy all of the materials locally and just put it together yourself. There are people that do this professionally, and they can give you a leg up, and that's the approach I took here, was to buy the base kit for wounds and burns. And then I'm adding to that in things that I know are really, really, really useful, because I've had a lot of wounds and burns, and I've got a lot of experience at it. So, and then also I want to discuss the issue of animals and their impact on your thinking as well. So in preparing the medical kits around here, what I've done is, because I have the boat, I make up two of them, one for the boat, one for the house. And this will come in handy in case we do get or especially as I'm expecting a very large earthquake, and there will probably be all kinds of levels of damage. One thing I need to note too here is that if you have the wherewithal, what makes sense is to buy the materials and put them in your medical chest, even if you don't have the level of expertise to use these materials, some of them, because there's actually a great number of individuals out and about in circumstances of disasters and so on, who do have skills, but would not necessarily have material on them. I know of an instance where there was an earthquake, and in fact I went through it, in Mexico City, in an area that I wasn't in. This was an 8.1. There were some guys I know. I discussed this with them in the airplane as we were leaving Mexico City. But these guys went through a really nasty situation, and there were 3 of them who were EMTs who were visiting, vacationing in Mexico City during this earthquake, and here they are with all kinds of knowledge, but nothing at all to help. And this was an earthquake in which 10,000 people died. And so basically what they ended up having to do was to get a bunch of locals to go and raid a local pharmacy to provide them with gear, and they set up a triage situation right in the middle of the street. They ended up getting medals, I think, like 2 or 3 years later from the Mexican government for their assistance in all of this, because they really were heroes. I mean, just their mere presence rallied this whole area. And they were all pleased with themselves and just exhausted as well. We all were exhausted getting out. But anyway, though, so just having the materials on hand it's kind of like the old saying, always stay a little bit hungry. You never know when you're going to run into pie. And here you would be a situation of, okay, I don't necessarily know how to use these surgical instruments, but I have a good set. They're, not necessarily disposable, but not hugely expensive, and are good for an emergency, what is known as a field surgery situation. And it's relatively few dollars. I purchase them, I put them in my kit, because I may run into somebody who has some level of surgical skills under the circumstances. Or, quite frankly, you may need to use them yourself under extreme conditions, and so you need to be prepared for that. So basically what I do is I take these expedition grade polycarbonate enclosed floating box, marine environment designed wound and burn kits, and then I add stuff to them. So for on the burn side, I will add all of the really cool stuff that these people are not able to provide in their box because of storage issues and availability and so on. So I'll put in arnica oil. Nothing takes away pain from burns like arnica oil. You only need a smear of it across there. You don't throw vast quantities of it on there, and it just removes pain like mad. You have to reapply, if it's a really bad burn, you might have to reapply several minutes later, and then several minutes later, and so on throughout the day until the pain is totally taken away. You can also use ice to remove the latent heat that's been transferred, which is the separate issue that it basically refocuses the pain. But the arnica oil will just instantly soothe the nerves and also causes all kinds of good things to happen to the damaged skin. So arnica oil is a necessity. It cannot be taken internally, so you got to be careful about that. It's really nasty, poisonous kind of stuff. Arnica oil, if you're going to put it on an animal that might lick it, has got to be protected from that animal ingesting it. But it, again, works on them very well. If you get a burn on a dog or a cat, it works extremely well, especially on their paws. And arnica oil can be mixed with aloe as a method of keeping or it can either be put on first and then the aloe put over, or you can mix the two together and it'll stay basically in solution in the aloe if you only use a little tiny bit. And that's the thing about arnica oil. Very small amount, extremely small amount. It goes forever. That's why the little bottles are so small. Anyway, so put arnica oil. You can put in these packets of aloe gel that are stabilized. I get them at our local food co-op. You can also get aloe in stabilized form in jars, or just have the plants growing all the time. So it's really good to have for the burn side of it all. Now on the wound side, I go the extra stage. These kits I get from this group, and I'll tell you who they are here in a minute, are really nice in a lot of ways. They're fully packed out, and I could indeed replicate them cheaper here probably, but it wouldn't be effective because they've got these really nice polycarbonate cases that float, that are great for organizing and are tough. You cannot break these things. I mean, you could probably hit them with a sledgehammer and crack them up, but short of that, they probably would survive most of the damage that would occur in an earthquake, and you could dig them out of the rubble and you'd be good to go. But anyway, the thing that they don't include in here are the really severe kind of wound stuff, where you may have to, so they have no, other than the minor tweezers. The good part is they have things like razors for removing the hair on yourself or animals around wounds. They have all of the kind of band-aids and compression band-aids and ointments and all of that kind of stuff, Silvadine and all these sort of things you're going to need, and they can be used to provide extended level expedition care. There's not a lot of everything. It's not like you've got thousands of bandages of everything, but you have a methodology and a little book on top and all of just the necessities to get you through what we can think of as expedition level care. Now, expedition level care can be defined as 5 days out. So you're 5 days out from, at a bare minimum, you're 5 days out from sophisticated medical care, and you've got to deal with it for the next 5 days. And this gets you covered on that. It gets you through the immediacy of it all, and gets you moving on the stabilization of whatever the wound and the burn may be, and moves you forward towards getting towards the sophisticated medical care. Now, a number of things I would add to this, and will add to these two kits here, include things like the blood clot material, so that you just throw that in and into any kind of a huge wound, and it stops the bleeding right away. It's the stuff they're using in the war zones. You can buy this. By the way, all of these things that I'm going to be mentioning here, you can get at vet supply stores, and you just have to agree that indeed you're using them for veterinary grade use. Now, in an emergency, I don't give a damn if it's veterinary grade or not if it works, because the idea is that you examine, observe, plan, stabilize, or plan, treat, stabilize, and move the wounded individual forward towards more sophisticated medical care or recovery. So my approach to this in terms of the wounds and burns is to include things like glucatures. Okay, these are sutures that are glue, and they're in individual packages. A lot of people would be very afraid to stitch up my leg if I got a giant gash in it, and I'm unable to do that because my hands are so riddled with these small hurts that I actually could not pick up and use a suture. Or I might be in a situation where I couldn't use a suture myself. So the things I will include in my kit will allow me to deal with very large wounds that are not arterial. That's the problem. If you get into something that's arterial, you got to have sutures. These glucature things will not necessarily hold. So what I do there, by the way, is I buy sutures. You can get them on Amazon in packs of 100. There are various different grades. They are for educational purposes, is how they're sold, for students who are learning to suture, and they suture up, bits of baloney, all different kinds of things in order to practice, and they need all these sutures. So it's a cheap form, but these are out of date. You're not supposed to be using them on human because they've got an expired lifespan. But I buy them anyway because, of course, the idea is I won't care if I can get to sophisticated medical care 5 days from now or not. If it's an expedition grade, I won't care if it's expired or not, if it stitches that part of my body together, even at the risk of infection, because the alternative is not pleasant. So I include these glue-based sutures, which are basically super glue. You can even use super glue. And the other point about that is, if I were in a situation where I was unable to do this myself, many people may be squeamish or uncertain about sticking a needle into you and tying you back up when you know you need to have that done and you even know how to do it. They may not be able to do it, but they will find themselves easily able to push the bits of flesh back together and apply basically super glue to it. And so I'll get a half a dozen of these sutures that are glue based and put them in each of the polycarbonate cases. So I've got the ability to do these. Now the glucatures go a lot further than sutures, so you don't need as many. I'll also put several hundred of the sutures in each of the cases. Further, I'll do things like I'm going to acquire and have with these cases a gallon of the barrier material. I think it's called Barrier 2, and it's a lidocaine wound wash for animals. It's got lidocaine in it, which deadens the pain. Now, that is really crucial. I've been in a situation where I've had to go without pain medication after a very severe wound that required 200 stitches, and I went for half a day, 12 hours, greater than 12 hours actually. But for probably 9 of those hours, I was in reasonable shape because the lidocaine that had been used in huge amounts to wash out the wound took care of the pain for as I say, almost probably 9 hours or so. Now, I would not have been able to, if I were in a situation where after the wound I'd encountered there, I could have strapped my leg together in some form of a brace and walked if I had to. For those 9 hours anyway, probably less than that with the walking. So let's say even maybe 4 hours. But that would have moved me away from any immediate damage. I would have been able to make my way into a more survivable situation. under the circumstances, and it would have been entirely due to the lidocaine wash. Absent that, I would have gone into shock because of the level of the damage to the flesh and all of the trauma and so on. In fact, I'm sure I was suffering some small level of shock, and that brings up the other issue. You can get, and in these kits here they have them as well, electrolytes.